Hello fans and frenemies, Nate Drakinator here. I love multi-animator projects. Coming together with a bunch of other artists to create a larger, cohesive project is one of my passions. Today I want to present a simple little guide on how you can launch your first map project or improve future ones. Remember that none of these are rules, just suggestions or observations I personally made as a host and as an artist. Today we'll go through three major sections: content, presentation, and execution. Let's start with part 1, content. First thing to decide is what kind of map you're actually running. Are you choosing a song, or is this a voice acting map? Most maps use music, but not all. If you're using copyrighted music, it's a good idea to upload an unlisted video with a song in it to check the copyright status. Is it flagged by YouTube? It may be blocked in some countries, or have ads running on it. If it's not blocked, you're good to go. If it doesn't already have ads running on it and your channel is monetized, though, you'll need to decide whether the final map will have monetization on or not, and let artists know in advance. If you've never heard of monetization before, a monetized channel is one that is paid to run ads on their channel through YouTube's partner program. And if you have it, you know you have it. If the video is monetized, you'll be receiving income from people watching it, and not everyone will be happy if you're generating a profit from their work without giving them a kickback. Though monetized maps for charity are usually okay, but you still need to tell people in advance. Now that you've got your song or audio, you want to write your script. For some maps, this will only consist of chopping up the audio into individual parts. If you're making a PMV or a limited animation map, your parts can be a little longer than if it's fully animated. Generally, I think that 6 to 12 seconds is about the sweet spot for part length. Go with the beat of the song and try to change parts on a note or a tone change so the cut won't be as jarring. A map that's just cut into parts might be an OC map or something a little bit more open-ended, like River Wren's mythological AU map or my non-binary color palette map. These leave the content of each part up to the individual artist and don't often have an overarching story or narrative. However, if a narrative is what you want, then you'll need to flesh out your script and indicate what should be happening in each part. I've seen scripts before that will say something like, Parts 7 to 10, the character is traveling to another clan, or something like that. Please don't do this. Indicate what's happening in each part individually. Your final product will look much better and your artists will have a clearer idea of your vision. You may even want to include a key indicating the skill level of each parts, or that a part contains lip syncing or color coding to show that which character is speaking. While some artists prefer more freedom in creating their part, most people I've spoken with actually agree that more information is better. The goal of a map is to create small parts of a big whole, and if you give me more information of specifically what's happening, it will help each part flow cohesively into the next. For example, Part 1, Mapleshade jumps onto a rock. Part 2, Mapleshade jumps off the rock. Now, two different artists can look at these parts and imagine two completely different rocks or locations of completely different sizes. You might get Mapleshade hopping up on a rock 3 times her size and then hopping off a rock that's up to her knees. It might go from day to night. So let's try adding more detail. Part 1, Sunset. Mapleshade hops onto a rock on the left side of the screen that is twice her size. It's smooth and tall. Part 2, Sunset. Mapleshade is standing on a rock on the left side of the screen. It's smooth and tall and twice her size. She crouches and then leaps down on her right side. This new version adds more detail so the artist can more accurately see what your vision is. It still gives them plenty of creative freedom, but there's less confusion on what it's supposed to look like, and when you put them together, odds are that they'll flow more nicely together. The next thing you want to include is artistic references and art direction. Any character that appears in the map needs to have a set design so that everyone draws the character the same way. Many artists have very large selections of character designs they've made available to map makers, but you should never use a design without permission. This is a personal choice, but I much prefer to join a map where at least the main characters have a design that I've never drawn before. While I love a lot of the more popular designs people use, sometimes I get tired of drawing the same one over and over again. Not to mention, having a unique design will help your map stand out and feel unique among others. Janelle Flowers has an excellent video on improving designs for animation that I highly recommend you check out. Remember though, that the level of complexity of a design should work sort of conversely with the level of complexity of requested animation. For example, if you want a part to be fully animated at 24 frames per second and you want me to draw this character 150 times, they sure as heck better be easy to draw. But if your map is a PMV map, and I only need to draw that character 3 times, then having a really complex design isn't really that big of a deal. Having complicated designs isn't always a bad thing, but if having 50 stripes on that cat is really that important to you, then you need to work around that and make it easy on the artists. PMV maps are great! Just make sure the artists don't feel like they have to draw that nightmare design 500 times. Some of my favorite designs I've worked with were really complicated ones that I would never want to animate fully, but really enjoyed making simpler PMV or limited animation parts for. Picking the level of animation in your map will have a big effect on how long you make the parts, how long you make the deadline, and how complicated you make the designs. Now, any moving image is a type of animation, but we'll break it up into my personal view of 3 major levels of animation that you might request for your map: PMV, limited animation, and fully animated. PMV, or picture music video, is sort of a community term. Personally, I'm not a huge fan because I don't think it's a super accurate term. A video of this specific style might not actually have music, and technically all animation is pictures. However, PMV is a term most people know and most people recognize, so that's kind of what a term is, and it works. It uses either still images or very simple tweening. This generally means you're requesting simpler parts or individual frames to be more detailed, but you aren't looking for much or any frame-by-frame animation. For PMV maps, it's okay for designs to be a little bit more complicated and for deadlines to be a little bit shorter, because you have to draw an individual character far fewer times. Limited animation is a term that I've personally been using lately with my friends, but I don't know if anybody else really uses this. I'm going to drop it here, though, while I show some examples. Limited animation, as far as I'm concerned, is somewhere between PMV and fully animated. I generally think of this as when I see people who animate by motion tweening heads or limbs of a character as they move, instead of just moving the whole, image of the character across the screen. Personally, this is my favorite type of map to work on, and my favorite sort of animation style to play with, but everyone has their own preferences. Fully animated is exactly what you think it is. This means you animate it by individually drawing each frame. Sometimes you won't need every part of the screen to be drawn new in each frame, like if a character is talking or if they're only moving one limb, but when the majority of the animation and movement is frame-by-frame art, this will put it in a very different category than PMV or limited animation. For a fully animated map, you really want to keep your individual parts short and your design simple, because you may be asking someone to draw the design 150 times. And you really want to lose those stripes where you can. Shout out to every artist on Twitter who gave me permission to use their parts here as examples. You guys are lovely, and if you're watching this, you should definitely go check out all of them, and especially the parts that I've linked here, because they're beautiful and I love everyone. Something I often see people overlook in map designs is set design. If your map takes place in one area, it might be a good idea to do some art of what that area actually looks like. That way, just like your characters, every artist draws the location the same way. It can also help keep the colors consistent across parts because they have a reference to work from. Some artists draw their own sets when doing this, and some use photo references. Remember, just like at designs, stick to using photos that you have permission to use. There's a ton of great public domain photos out there to work with. That's a super quick rundown on what kind of content it's good to have before you launch your map, but there's a ton of other things that you can include to help your artists, like color references or even storyboards. But now that you have your map concept fleshed out, it's time for Part 2, Presentation. The first thing to do is organize your content. Where can your artists see your script? Where can they find the designs? Most people put their scripts into a Google Doc, and I find that this is the best place for it. Though some people will use a DeviantArt, like a journal or one of those literature posts, and that's fine too. You should make sure that each part is visible and separate so you can tell which part is which based on the document alone. I like to highlight my script in yellow and sometimes put the lyrics in italics, while the part number will be in bold and the owner of each part is highlighted in blue. This makes me feel organized, but some people like to put each part into a table or highlight each part a different color. This is really up to you, but don't be afraid to ask a friend for feedback on how your script looks before you go live. If you put your designs in the Google Doc, people can't copy and paste or save them straight from the document. They'll need to take a screenshot. Now, personally, I don't find this a problem, but it really annoys some people, so it can be a good idea to also include image links to where the designs are posted somewhere else that they can be saved, or a DeviantArt stash folder with all of the designs in it. It's okay to have multiple options for things like this too. You can have them in the Google Doc and include a stash folder, because different artists have different preferences. Now that you've got that squared away, it's time to set up your map call video. Including a nice image that really pops can make your map call an eye-catcher that encourages people to click through and read your script. Including multiple pictures can really help people get into your concept and vision. For example, if your characters move from one location to another, and you have the image on screen change from them in the first location to the next with the general color scheme that you want, it could really help people imagine what it will look like when it's finished. This is just something a little extra that you can do to get people really excited for your map. It should be clear on screen when a part changes. If you use an effect where the text fades or slides in instead of just changing from the last part to the next, it can make it unclear exactly when the part should start or end. Including a timestamp can be incredibly helpful to artists when cutting audio. Alternatively, you could cut the audio yourself and provide downloads to the individual 6 to 12 second chunks. The description under your video should have all the rules, like whether or not green screen is allowed, how many parts people can apply for, the aspect ratio for the part, and the deadline. I would recommend 1920 by 1080 pixels for your aspect ratio. 1080 is high resolution. It's also good to include links to the Google Doc and anything else you have, like a stash folder, and when you start getting parts in, a link to a whip playlist, but I'll come back to that part later. You should make sure that the title of your map call video is updated when it needs to be and indicates whether your map is closed, open, if you need backups, when the deadline is, and how many parts are finished. It helps both you and your artists keep everything nice and tidy. Speaking of deadlines, make sure yours is clear and reasonable. It's so important to make sure artists know whether they're applying for a 2-week map or a 3-month map. With that, let's move on to our last topic. Part 3, execution. So your script is done, your map call is up, and people are asking for parts. If you have a lot of subscribers, you might need to close applications after a day or two if you get a ton, but if you're smaller, it might take a while before you fill up, and that's okay. If you keep pushing, sharing whips of your part, and showing people your passion, you can finish your map. Your first job is choosing artists. Take a look at people's channels before you give them a part. Have they ever done a map before? Do they have any experience with the type of animation you're asking for? I've seen people who seem to think that subscriber count is something people look at when choosing artists, but I'll tell you that's definitely not a factor for me. I want to see if I think an artist will be able to complete the part they've requested. Like, if this is a fully animated map, have they ever done that kind of animation before? When you've picked the artist you want, make sure you let them know and add all their names to the description of the video next to which part they have. I know that I forget what part I grab sometimes, and I need to go back and double check. During the work time of your map, you'll want to send reminders to people if you haven't heard from them in a while. If you're running a 2-week map, you probably don't need to message anyone until the deadline is a few days away, at which point just drop them a polite, "Hey, how's that part coming?" But if this is like a 3-month map, maybe reply to their comment asking for a part after like a month and say, "Hey, this is just a friendly map reminder." It's so easy to forget stuff like that sometimes, and I find like the number one reason I have parts come in late is because people just forgot that they had that part and that they were supposed to be working on it. It also gives people an opportunity to let you know if they need an extension or if they need to drop. You can take this a step further by making a Discord server for your map. Your animators or even people just excited for the project can join the server, and your artist can keep you updated with whips or ask questions or get feedback and critique from you and the other animators. It's a great way to improve your map and make communication way easier. And it's also a really good way to make some new friends. But you aren't just managing your artists during the work period. It's important to make sure hype for your map is always building. People should be excited to see the finished product. A great way to do this is with a thumbnail contest. This way, everyone can contribute to the map by creating a potential thumbnail, and people really enjoy getting their art into the credits. Map thumbnail contests are really a win-win. You get to build hype and get some awesome thumbnails, and everyone else still gets to participate in the map, even if it's just in a small way. And not to mention, map thumbnail speed paints are super popular on YouTube and great for monetized channels. I like to set up a Google Drive that people can add their thumbnails to. Another good way to do it is to have a DeviantArt journal that people can reply to with a link to their submission or even just a pinned comment. Another good way to do this is with a whip playlist. Having a public playlist of all the finished and work-in-progress parts can help you keep track of what's done and what's not, and keep people coming back to check and see how close you are to finishing. Finally, it's time to edit your map. You should have all the video files sent to you via SendSpace by your animators. and then edit them together with whatever program you like. Sometimes this might actually require tweaking parts. If a part is a half second too short and you can't get up with one of the animators to fix it, a bit of clever editing can hide that spot. It's important to add a watermark with the animator's username somewhere on the screen, usually in a corner at a low opacity, and then to include them in the credits as well. Don't forget to include anything else you need to in the credits, like if someone helped you with editing or scripting, it's nice to make sure that they're mentioned here. Also, a great place to show off all your thumbnail contest entries. Once your video is done, you just need to upload it and set up the description. It's good form to include links to all the artists' channels, and I think also a good idea to link to your WIP playlist to make it easy for people to find the individual parts from the map if they want to see more. Lastly, I'd recommend making sure that your map posts at a high traffic time of the day, usually in the afternoon. You would be surprised how much the time you post something can affect how many people will actually see it. I hope some of these tips have been helpful when you're setting up your next map. Remember, there's no hard rules and every project is going to be different. Do you have any suggestions for map hosts? Are you an animator or a map host yourself? Let me know in the comments your tips and tricks to running a successful map. I'll see you in the next one. Naders out!